Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with champagne chicken. That's right, champagne problems need champagne solutions, which sometimes is actually champagne. And that's exactly what I used to turn some boring old boneless, skinless chicken breasts into a truly amazing dish featuring a world-class pan sauce. And this might sound fancy, but it is very simple and easy to make. And to get started, we will season both sides of our chicken breast with some kosher salt. And you know me, I like to be generous, especially if we're using large breasts. Right, these were like 8 or 9 ounces each, so we do want to make sure we use enough salt. And once that's been accomplished, we will head to the stove, where we're going to brown these over high heat in some olive oil, in a pan that's big enough to fit all the breasts in one layer. And also, it's nice if we use a pan that's a couple inches deep, since we want plenty of room to make this incredible pan sauce. And while that first side browns for about 3 or 4 minutes, we can go ahead and season this side with some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a few shakes of cayenne. Oh, and applying this evenly is just for show, since any and all spices and seasonings are going to dissolve into the sauce. But anyway, the point is we could add that at any time. And for me, this was the time. And that's it. After 3 or 4 minutes, we'll turn those over, and we'll brown the other sides for a few minutes. And we're using the term loosely, since there's no skin on these, which is actually what browns up when you pan-fried chicken breast. But as you can see, we are going to get a little bit of color, which will add a little bit of flavor and make our sauce look even better. And once we have both sides browned, we will turn off the heat and remove that chicken to a plate. And no, it is not cooked all the way through yet, but that's perfect since we're going to finish it in the sauce. Speaking of which, we'll start that by tossing some butter into the pan, and we'll turn our heat back on to medium-high. And please note all those gorgeous chicken drippings caramelized onto the bottom of the pan. That is always how you want to start any great pan sauce. And then once that butter's just about melted, we'll go ahead and transfer in some sliced mushrooms, along with a nice big pinch of salt. And as you might know, what's going to happen is that salt's going to draw moisture from the mushrooms, which is going to deglaze and release all that goodness from the bottom of the pan, which is going to soak into the mushrooms while they brown. And how long you do this, and how deeply brown you get these mushrooms is going to be up to you. But I think we definitely want to get a decent amount of color on these. Not just for appearances, but also for a deeper flavor. So I think we should cook those at least this far. And we could if we wanted even go a little further. But anyway, these were looking good to me. And once they are, we'll stop and add some finely diced up shallots, plus a few cloves of finely minced garlic. And we will mix those in. And then we'll cook this stirring for about 3 or 4 minutes, or until those shallots just start to turn translucent. Oh, and we're using shallots, since this is based on an old school French sauce, but feel free to substitute with any other kind of onion. But anyway, once that's been sauteed for a few minutes, we will stop and sprinkle over some flour, which we are going to stir in and cook for about a minute, just to sort of take off the raw edge. And once that flour stops looking like flour, and it starts sticking to the bottom of the pan, and it looks a little something like this, that is our clue to stop and pour in the star of the show, which is half a bottle of champagne. Although we probably don't want to use real champagne here. All right, let's save that to drink. All right, what we really should use is a nice dry sparkling wine, something in the $10 to $12 bottle range. And yes, if you're not going to drink the rest, they sell half bottles at the store, which is the perfect amount for this. But anyway, no matter what we use, we'll go ahead and stir that in, making sure we're scraping the bottom of the pan with our spatula to release any and all that caramelized goodness and cooked on flour. And once we do that, we're going to let this cook on medium-high heat for a few minutes, or until that champagne reduces by about half, and this mixture thickens up, which is obviously happening because of that flour we added. And one visual clue you've gone far enough is if we drag that spatula along the bottom, it actually takes like half a second for that to fill in. Right, you see that? That is just about perfect. And once we do get to that point, we can add the rest of the sauce ingredients, except for one secret ingredient later. But at this point, we'll add a little bit of tomato paste for some color, savoriness, and acidity. And then we'll also do a little bit of freshly picked thyme leaves, which is one of the great chicken herbs of all time. And then we'll also at this point add some chicken broth, or chicken bouillon, or chicken stock. And no, it definitely doesn't need to be homemade. Okay, I just mixed some chicken bouillon paste into some hot water. And we'll stir that in and wait for everything to come back to a simmer. And while we do, I'm going to go ahead and add the last official ingredient, which is a generous splash of heavy cream, which I guess is technically optional, since if you don't add it, you'll still have a very, very delicious champagne sauce. It's just not as delicious and rich and beautiful as if we add it. And then what we'll do is let this cook on medium-high for about 10 minutes or so, until everything reduces and thickens up again, which is probably going to take about 10 minutes, but that's just a guess. So we'll just keep checking with a spoon. And right here it was starting to thicken up, but not nearly enough. Okay, what we're really going for is something that looks like this. All right, it should definitely be thick enough to coat a spoon, since if it coats a spoon, it will definitely coat a chicken breast. And once we decide that's gone long enough, we'll reduce our heat to low, and we'll stir in that secret ingredient I mentioned earlier, which is a tablespoon of aged balsamic vinegar, which adds some acidity and makes the sauce color even more beautiful. Plus, I think it elevates the flavor of our champagne even more. But anyway, that addition is up to you. I mean, you are, after all, the Taylor Swift of whether the sauce needs a lift. But either way, once that's in, we can go ahead and transfer our chicken back into the pan, along with, of course, any accumulated juices. Can you believe some people throw those away? I know that is terrible. But anyway, what we'll do to finish this recipe is finish cooking our chicken breast in the sauce over somewhere between low and medium-low heat. And what I like to do after giving these a quick toss is let them simmer for a couple minutes on one side, and then flipping them over and giving them a couple minutes on the other side. And I'll keep doing that until my chicken's safely cooked through. And in between flips, mostly because it's fun, we can take a spoon and baste the tops with our hot sauce, which might speed things up a little bit. But don't forget, our chicken was already cooked about halfway through, so this really is not going to take too long. But regardless, we still want to flip those back and forth to make sure we're getting a nice even cooking. And I would love to give you a specific time for this, but I can't. All right, it depends on the size of your chicken breasts and how long you initially browned them for. So time is not going to work, but internal temperature will. And what I generally shoot for is an internal temp of 150, which if held at least that temp for 3 to 4 minutes, is totally safe. So that's my system. If you ask the government, they're going to tell you to go to 165, which yes, would be totally safe and totally dry. And that's it. Once we determine our chicken's cooked, we are done. Although we really should taste the sauce for seasoning, which I did, and it was perfect. And if it is, we'll go ahead and pull that off the heat and maybe make it a little more presentable for our guests, or in my case, contractually obligated pictures. And all that means is situating these exactly how we want, and then maybe spooning some of that gorgeous sauce over the top so we get to see some of those beautiful mushrooms. And once I was finished fussing around, I went ahead and finished up with a few more freshly picked thyme leaves. And that's it, our champagne chicken is ready to enjoy. And I know it's not really champagne chicken, but sparkling wine chicken just doesn't have the same ring to it. So if the name bothers you, that's your problem, which literally and figuratively would be a champagne problem. But anyway, I grabbed a fork and knife and dug in, which is not smart, because you don't want to wreck your nice cookware. But I could not help myself. Since this looked and smelled so good, I had to take the chance. And that, my friends, really was phenomenal. Right, these type of old school pan sauces are classics for a reason. Right, the depth of flavor here is impressive. And if everything goes according to plan, we're going to end up with the perfect balance between sweet and sour and savory. And yes, we could do the exact same sauce with any white wine, but there's just something a little extra special that happens when we use the champagne. It just seems to make it that much better, and of course makes for a much sexier name. And I know a lot of you aren't paying attention because you're scared I'm going to scratch this pan, like my wife. So let me stop before I do any real damage, and I'll serve one of these breasts up, like God intended, on top of some mashed potatoes. And if you follow the recipe fairly closely, you should end up with 4 very generous portions of sauce. And then I went ahead and finished up with some more fresh thyme. And then I grabbed my fork and knife and went back to eating this in a much smarter, more appropriate way. And by the way, at home, just put the chicken next to the mashed potatoes, since it's a lot easier to cut and eat that way. Right, people like me have to put it on top to give it some height so it looks better for the picture. But either way, no matter how you serve this, as I was saying, it is beyond delicious and one of my favorite chicken preparations of all time. And whether you end up doing this with sparkling wine or you actually use real champagne, this is a must-learn, must-make dish, and I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.